There's a stillness in Cedar Falls, Tennessee that most folks find comforting. It's the kind of quiet you get in a small town, where the loudest sound on a weekday afternoon is the hum of cicadas or the creak of a rocking chair on an old porch. But on the day my world shifted forever, that stillness felt heavy, almost suffocating. I was standing at my kitchen sink, rinsing a coffee mug, when I saw her, my granddaughter, Emma, appear at the end of my walkway. She wasn't skipping or humming the way she usually did when she came to visit. She wasn't even walking like a 6-year-old should. She was moving slow, careful, like each step was a decision. And then I noticed her arm. She was cradling it close to her body, her small fingers gripping the fabric of her dress. My chest tightened, and I dried my hands quickly on my apron. "Emma? Baby girl, what happened?" I called out as I stepped onto the porch. She stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at me. There was something in her eyes that didn't belong in a child's face. A mixture of fear and weariness that made my stomach twist. "I walked here," she said softly. That alone sent alarm bells through me. Our houses were only 2 blocks apart, but Emma had never walked here alone, not once in all her 6 years. Cedar Falls might be a small town, but you just don't let a child that young wander by herself. "You walked?" I tried to keep my voice light, calm, but I could already feel my heart pounding in my ears. She nodded, then slowly climbed the porch steps. And that's when I saw it. The bruises, dark, distinct, fingerprint-shaped marks wrapped around her tiny upper arm. My first instinct was to reach for her, but when I touched her gently, she flinched. I knelt down so I could look her in the eye. "Sweetheart, who did this to you?" She looked at the floorboards and whispered something I almost didn't catch. "Daddy got mad. I spilled juice on his papers." The words hit me harder than if someone had struck me. Her stepfather, Derek. In that moment, the air seemed to leave the world. I wanted to tell her everything would be okay, that Grandma was here, and she didn't need to be afraid anymore. But deep down, I knew what she'd just told me was only the tip of something darker, something I could no longer pretend wasn't happening. And right there, with the late afternoon sun slanting across my porch and my granddaughter's small hand trembling in mine, I knew I was about to cross a line I could never uncross. I led Emma inside, careful not to touch her injured arm. She sat at my kitchen table, legs dangling above the floor, staring at the sugar jar like she was somewhere else entirely. I put on the kettle, more for something to do than because either of us needed tea. When I finally sat across from her, I took a deep breath. "Emma, honey, can you tell Grandma exactly what happened?" She didn't look at me. Her small voice barely carried across the table. He grabbed me, shook me, said I was clumsy, and..." Her voice cracked, and her eyes darted toward the door, as if she was afraid Derek might burst through it at any moment. "He said if I told you, or Mommy, he'd hurt her too, and it would be my fault." I felt my hands curl into fists right there on the table. My chest ached with the kind of anger only a grandmother can feel. Not hot and loud, but deep, bone deep, the kind that sits in your soul and demands action. I'd been suspicious for months. I'd seen the way Emma sometimes went quiet when Derek was around. I'd noticed the excuses Sarah, my daughter, made for why Emma couldn't visit.
And I told myself I was imagining it, because believing otherwise meant admitting that the man my daughter married, the man who lived under the same roof as my precious grandbaby, was capable of hurting her. Now, I couldn't pretend anymore. But here's the thing no one tells you. When you know, truly know, that a child you love is being hurt, there's no clear manual for what comes next. I could call the sheriff, but Cedar Falls is small. Derek's family's been here for generations, and the sheriff played baseball with his brother in high school. Maybe he'd believe me, maybe he wouldn't. And if he didn't, Derek would know I'd tried to turn him in, and I'd lose what little access I still had to Emma. I could go straight to Sarah, but I'd seen how deep in denial she was. She'd defend her husband before she'd believe the worst of him. And if Derek convinced her I was lying, or worse, losing my mind, she might shut me out completely. So I sat there, looking at my granddaughter's small, trembling frame, and realized something I never wanted to admit. If Emma was going to be safe, I might have to be the one to make her safe. And that meant stepping into a darkness I'd never been in before.
That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room with only the lamp on, listening to the old clock on the wall tick like it was counting down to something I couldn't name. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those purple bruises circling Emma's tiny arm. Fingerprints. His fingerprints. When the sun finally came up, I made myself a pot of coffee and stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at Derek and Sarah's house 2 blocks away. I thought about how many mornings I'd looked out that same window, hoping to see Emma on her way to school, maybe waving at me from the sidewalk. Not anymore. By noon, I'd made up my mind. If the system wasn't going to protect her, then I'd make damn sure he understood one thing. You do not lay a hand on my granddaughter. I remembered Harold's old shotgun, tucked away in the closet since the day he died. He'd shown me how to use it back when we first moved into this house. Every woman should know how to protect herself, he'd said. At the time, I'd thought he meant against strangers, not someone my daughter had invited into her own home. But before I could even think about pulling that gun out, I had to be smart. If I went at Derek the wrong way, he'd turn it around on me, the same way abusers always do. I needed to see him, alone, without Sarah or Emma around. So I started watching his routine. Derek was lazy when it came to work. He'd take off early from construction jobs, drive home in his beat-up blue pickup, crack a beer before the afternoon news. Friday nights, like clockwork, he'd head to Murphy's bar, have just enough to drink that his reflexes slowed down, and take that winding, dark stretch of County Road 15 back home. It would be easy to run into him then. Too easy. But that was the thing. Once I crossed that line, I couldn't uncross it. And as much as I wanted to protect Emma, I also knew the second I made Derek afraid of me, I'd be putting a target on my own back. The question was I ready to live with that?
It was Thursday afternoon when I finally decided there would be no more waiting. Sarah was on the day shift at the hospital. Emma would be at school until nearly 4. That left Derek alone in that filthy house of his, exactly how I wanted him. I walked the 2 blocks with my head high, the way I used to march into the principal's office when I taught elementary school. Same firm steps, same don't mess with me look. Except this time, I wasn't protecting a student. I was protecting blood. When Derek opened the door, I smelled beer before I even saw him. He was wearing the same stained t-shirt I'd seen him in 3 days ago, his hair greasy and matted, like he hadn't bothered with a shower. "Maggie," he said, dragging my name out in a mock-friendly drawl. "Sarah's not home." "I know she's not," I said, pushing past him before he could think of a way to block me. "I'm here for you." He tried to laugh it off. "What's this about?" I didn't sit down. I didn't give him the comfort of casual conversation. I stood in the middle of his living room, the one Sarah used to keep spotless before he turned it into a dump, and looked him dead in the eye. "I know what you've been doing to Emma, and I know about the threats," she told me. For the briefest flicker of a moment, his smirk slipped, his jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. Then just like that, he pasted on that same phony look I'd seen him wear in public 100 times. "Maggie, you've lost it," he said with a slow shake of his head. "Emma's clumsy, falls all the time. I've never hurt her. Sarah knows that." "Don't you dare lie to me," I snapped. My voice was steel. "I've seen the bruises. I've heard her cry in her sleep, and I know exactly what you are." His face hardened, his shoulders squaring as he stepped closer. "And what's that? A coward who picks on a 6-year-old because you're too small of a man to face someone your own size." The air in that room felt heavy. His fist flexed. I could see him thinking about how far he could push me, wondering if my threats were just words. "You keep your nose out of my business, old woman," he hissed. "You try to poison Sarah against me again, and I swear you'll never see Emma again." I took a slow step toward him until we were only a couple of feet apart. My voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow louder than shouting. "If you ever, and I mean ever, lay a hand on her again, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." We stared at each other for a long moment. Neither of us blinked, and that's when I knew this man wasn't going to change because I asked. He'd only change if I made him.
That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the old clock in the hallway ticking like it was counting down to something. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Derek's face. That smug little curl at the corner of his mouth like he thought he'd won something. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring out at the oak tree Harold planted the year Sarah was born. I kept asking myself one question. If I do nothing, what happens to Emma next? By midnight, I knew the answer. I had seen men like Derek before, not just mean, but calculated. He'd push and push until Emma either broke or stopped fighting back. And a child who stops fighting back? Well, I'd buried a student once who'd stopped fighting back. I wasn't about to bury my granddaughter. I started writing a list. Not a to-do list, a how to make a monster stop list. Derek's work hours, his Friday night drinking at Murphy's, that stretch of County Road 15 where the trees swallowed the streetlights. By 1:30 a.m., the plan was sitting there in black ink. And once something's in writing, it feels real. But fate didn't wait for Friday. 2 days later, I was standing on my porch, watering the petunias, when I saw movement in Sarah's backyard. At first, I thought it was nothing, just Emma playing. But then I saw her running, her little legs pumping hard, her face pale with panic. She was heading for the gap in the fence, the same one she'd used when she came to me a few days earlier. And behind her, he was coming.
Derek's voice carried across both yards. "Get back here, you little brat! You think you can walk away from me when I'm talking to you?" Every muscle in my body went cold and hot at the same time. Emma was so close to the fence when he caught her by the shirt and yanked her backward. Her body snapped like a rag doll. Then I heard it, the crack of his hand against her face. That sound, I will take it to my grave. Emma crumpled into the dirt, her hands covering her face. I was already moving before I knew I'd dropped the watering can. "You get away from her right now!" I shouted, my voice shaking the birds out of the trees. When Derek turned to look at me, there was a flicker in his eyes. Not fear, not yet, but recognition. He knew this was the moment I'd stop being the quiet, polite grandmother. I knelt beside Emma. Blood from her nose was already dripping onto my hands. "It's okay, baby. Grandma's here." Derek loomed over us, his fists still clenched. "Put her down. She's my responsibility, not yours." I looked up at him. "This?" I said, gesturing to Emma's bruised cheek and split lip. "This is what you call responsibility?" And in that moment, with Emma trembling in my arms and Derek daring me to stop him, the plan I had written 2 nights ago wasn't just ink on paper anymore. It was a promise.
I carried Emma across my yard like she was made of glass. She was quiet now, too quiet. Her little hands gripped the front of my blouse, but her eyes were somewhere else entirely, staring into that blank space where children go when they've learned it's safer not to be here. I laid her on my couch and got a washcloth for the blood, but she flinched the moment I touched her face. "No, Grandma," she whispered. "Please, if he finds out I told, he'll hurt Mommy too." I froze. She wasn't just scared for herself. She was protecting Sarah. That's what Derek had done to her. Twisted her into believing her pain was the price for keeping her mother safe. And that's when something in me snapped. I'd played the long game for weeks, watched, waited, prayed for Sarah to wake up and see the truth. I'd bitten my tongue bloody, trying not to drive her further into his corner. But this was the line. I heard a car pull into their driveway. Sarah was home early. I looked out the window and saw Derek meet her halfway, talking fast, gesturing like a man selling a story he'd already rehearsed. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see Sarah's face, pale, confused, almost believing. A few minutes later, she was in my living room. Her eyes went straight to Emma. She gasped, because the damage was worse up close. But before I could speak, she was already defending him. "She fell, Mom, down the stairs. You know how clumsy she is." "There are no stairs in your backyard," I said flatly. "I saw him hit her." Her mouth tightened. "You've got to stop this. You're making yourself sick." "No, I was done being sick." "Sarah, if you take her back into that house tonight, you will regret it for the rest of your life." She didn't answer. She just scooped up Emma, who clung to her like a drowning child clings to a life raft, and left without another word. I stood in my doorway, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from the certainty that this was it. I couldn't wait for Friday anymore. Couldn't wait for the perfect dark stretch of road or the right moment when no one would see. Derek had drawn the line in blood, my granddaughter's blood. By sundown, Harold's old shotgun was laid out by the kitchen table. I cleaned it slow, steady, methodical, not because it needed it, but because the ritual gave me time to decide exactly kind of woman I was going to be when the sun came up. No more warnings. The moon was already up by the time I stepped off my porch. In my arms, Harold's shotgun felt heavier than I remembered. Not in weight, in meaning. every ounce of it carried the years I'd spent being decent, polite, patient, and every ounce told me that chapter of my life was over. I'd been keeping notes on Derek for months, his comings and goings, the nights he lingered too long at Murphy's bar, the way he always took County Road 15 home because it was faster and darker. I knew his habits better than I knew my own. That night, I slid behind the wheel at 11:15 sharp. The shotgun rested on the seat beside me, wrapped in an old quilt, like a secret I'd carried for far too long. The road to Miller's Pound was empty, just the hum of my engine and the crickets in the ditch. I parked where the trees pressed in close, their shadows swallowing my car whole. From here, I could see the bend where his headlights would first break through. I checked my watch. 11:44. Right on time, the faint glow appeared. His blue pickup rolled into view, weaving just enough to tell me the beer had done its work. I let him pass me, then pulled out fast with my high beams on, lighting up his cab like a prison spotlight. I stayed on his bumper long enough for him to notice, then pulled into the other lane and leveled my speed with his. When he looked over and saw me, his face went through 3 expressions in a blink: surprise, annoyance, then something that almost looked like doubt. I rolled my window down. "Pull over, Derek." He shouted back something about me being out of my mind, but there was an edge in his voice that hadn't been there before. I pulled ahead, forcing him toward the shoulder. His tires crunched gravel, and he stopped. When I stepped out, the quilt came with me, and so did the shotgun. "You've got about 10 seconds to start listening," I told him, "or this conversation ends right here on the road." He laughed, but it was short, hollow. "You wouldn't shoot me. You're not a killer." I took one slow step closer. "No, Derek, I'm a grandmother. And the difference is, a killer takes life. A grandmother protects it. You lay one more hand on Emma, and I'll show you just how far protection goes." For the first time since I'd known him, Derek didn't have a comeback.
Derek's mouth opened like he wanted to spit another lie, but nothing came out. I could see it now. The truth he'd worked so hard to hide was fighting for space with the fear creeping up his spine. "You think I'm bluffing?" I said, keeping my voice low. "Go ahead, test me. But before you do, I want you to think about something." I stepped close enough for the barrel to touch his chest. His breath smelled of beer and stale cigarettes, and I saw his Adam's apple bob when he swallowed. "I've already lost my daughter. The whole town thinks I'm crazy. They whisper about me in church. Do you know what that means, Derek? It means there is nothing left you can take from me, except Emma. And you lay one more finger on her, I will take everything from you." He tried to keep his eyes on mine, but they flickered, just for a second, toward the tree line. That was the tell. He was looking for an escape. "I'm not here to ruin your marriage," I said. "I'm not here to send you to prison. You're gonna stay right where you are. You're gonna smile for the neighbors, play the doting stepfather, and make sure that little girl sleeps safe every single night. Because the second you slip, the second you forget this talk, I'll be there." He nodded, once, twice. The kind of nod you give when you're out of arguments. "Say it," I demanded. I'll take care of her. I'll never touch her again." "Good," I said, lowering the gun but never taking my eyes off him. "I can live with being the town lunatic, Derek. But you
you wouldn't live long enough to enjoy it. I turned, walked back to my car, and didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't need to. The silence behind me told me everything I needed to know. The predator had just been taught there was something bigger, older, and far more dangerous hunting him now.
The next morning, the world looked exactly the same. Sunlight spilling over the rooftops of Cedar Ridge, coffee brewing in my old percolator, the Hendersons' dog barking at the mailman. But underneath, something had shifted. I was in my garden, pretending to fuss over the tomatoes, when I heard voices drift over from Sarah's backyard. Not just voices, laughter. "How about we build you a treehouse, princess?" Derek's voice was almost cheerful. "We'll make it pink, your favorite color." There was a pause, then Emma's tiny, cautious voice. "Really? You want to build something? With me?" "Of course," he said, forcing warmth into his tone. "We'll start this weekend. Maybe I'll even teach you to ride your bike without training wheels." I stayed crouched in the dirt, listening, the trowel heavy in my hand. It was so foreign. Derek offering to spend time with her. The man I'd seen raise his hand in rage, now speaking like some Hallmark Channel dad. For the next few weeks, it was the same story. From my kitchen window, I watched him push her on the swing set he'd built, help her with homework on the porch, even braid her hair once, badly, but the effort was there. To anyone else, they looked like the perfect family. But I could see the truth. The way his hands sometimes trembled when he thought no one was watching. The way he'd glance toward my house every so often, as if to make sure the silhouette in the kitchen window was still there. He wasn't reformed, he was afraid. And fear, I knew, could be a powerful leash, one I intended to keep tight. But it came with a price. Sarah still wouldn't speak to me. She'd pick Emma up from school herself instead of letting her walk past my house. She drove by without looking, the set of her jaw stiff as stone. To her, I was still the problem, still the crazy mother who tried to tear her marriage apart. And so I became a ghost in my own family, watching from the shadows, making sure the monster stayed on his best behavior.
Winter came early to Cedar Ridge that year. Frost painted the grass silver, and the air held that sharp bite that made your breath curl like smoke. From my kitchen window, I'd watch Emma bundle up for school, scarf wrapped too loosely, mittens hanging from her sleeves like they had when Sarah was little. I'd stand there every morning at 8:15 sharp, coffee in hand, and watch her walk down the block. Sometimes she'd glance toward my house, and I'd raise my hand in a small wave. She never waved back. I told myself it was because Derek was watching, or because Sarah had told her not to. But the truth still stung. I was a presence in her life she couldn't openly acknowledge. The rest of the town treated me much the same. People I'd known for decades avoided eye contact in the grocery store. Some crossed the street when they saw me coming, not out of fear, but that uncomfortable pity reserved for the poor soul who lost her mind. Even Mrs. Henderson, who'd been my neighbor for over 40 years, stopped waving when she hung her laundry. Pastor Reynolds only visited once, and the conversation was stiff, cautious, his eyes scanning my face like he was trying to decide if Derek's story about my episodes might be true. It was a strange kind of exile. I lived in the same house I'd always lived in, on the same street I'd always walked, but I no longer belonged to it. Yet, every time I thought about how much I'd lost, I would see Emma in her backyard. She was smiling now, running, laughing, no bruises, no shrinking back when Derek spoke to her. she was safe. That was my reward. My punishment was everything else. But I'd take that trade 1,000 times over.
It was a mild afternoon in late April, nearly 2 years after that night at Miller's Pond, when I first heard her voice again. I was kneeling in my garden, coaxing stubborn tomato plants into the soil, when a soft, tentative call drifted over the fence. "Grandma Maggie!" For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it, that my mind, starved for her voice, had conjured it out of the spring air. But when I looked up, there she was, standing at the narrow gap in the fence where she used to sneak through as a little girl. She was taller now, 8 years old, with her mother's green eyes and a yellow dress I'd never seen before. In her hands, she clutched a piece of paper. She glanced around nervously, checking for watchers. Then, with a sudden burst of courage, she darted through the gap and ran straight into my arms. I held her so tightly I could feel her heart beat against mine. The smell of strawberry shampoo in her hair nearly broke me in half. "I missed you so much, Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I missed you every single day." I had 1,000 things to say. How I thought of her every morning, how I'd give anything for one more Christmas together. But all I could manage was, "I missed you too, baby girl, more than you could ever know." She pulled back, eyes bright with something between joy and determination. "I have to tell you something important." She handed me the paper. It was a child's drawing. 2 stick figures, a little girl and an older woman, holding hands under a rainbow. Above them, in shaky letters, she'd written, "My hero." "My teacher told us to draw someone who makes us feel safe. I drew you." For the first time in 2 years, the ache in my chest eased. She remembered. She understood. And no matter what lies Derek or Sarah had spun, Emma knew the truth.
Emma sat right there in the dirt beside me, not caring one bit about the yellow dress she was wearing. Her little fingers traced shapes in the soil as she spoke, her voice quiet but steady, the kind of steady that told me she'd been carrying these thoughts for years. "I wasn't as little as everyone thought, Grandma," she began. "I remember things." My heart tightened. I remember being scared all the time, how Derek would hurt me when Mommy wasn't home. And I remember the day you yelled at him in the backyard. That was the last time he ever touched me. I stayed silent, letting her talk, because I knew these words had been sitting heavy inside her. For a long time, I didn't understand why you stopped coming. Mommy and Derek told me you were sick, that you had problems in your brain. But I never forgot how safe you made me feel. I never stopped loving you. I felt my throat tighten so much I could hardly breathe. Emma reached over and took my hand in both of hers, the same tiny hands I used to guide when she was learning to knead cookie dough. "Derek's nice now," she went on. "He helps me with homework, takes me to the park. But sometimes it feels like he's acting, like he's in a play, and I'm supposed to believe it. And every now and then, I see him look at you through the window, and he gets this scared look on his face." I almost smiled. That fear was the only thing keeping him in line. She squeezed my hand tighter. "I don't know exactly what you did, Grandma, but I know you made him stop. And I want you to know, I remember, and I understand. You saved me." I pulled her into my arms again, feeling her warmth, her strength. 2 years had passed, but the bond between us was unbroken.
That night, I couldn't sleep. Emma's visit had left my heart feeling full and my mind on high alert. I knew a secret like that couldn't stay hidden for long. Sure enough,
Just after 9 p.m., I saw the beam of a flashlight cutting across my yard. Derek. He didn't bother knocking, just stood at the bottom of my porch steps, that smug grin gone, replaced by something colder. "She came to see you today," he said flatly. "You think I wouldn't find out?" I stayed in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame. "She's my granddaughter. If she wants to see me, that's her right." His jaw flexed. "No, it's my right to decide who she sees. And you know why? Because I'm the one in that house. I'm the one raising her. And I've been playing nice, Maggie, but you keep testing me." I stepped forward just enough for the porch light to catch my eyes. "You call it playing nice. I call it doing the bare minimum, not hurting a child." For a second, he didn't speak. Then he leaned in, his voice dropping low enough that only I could hear. "You so much as look in her direction without my say-so, and I'll make sure Sarah takes her far away from this town. You'll never see her again." I didn't flinch. "And you remember what I told you years ago, Derek? You ever lay a hand on her again, and you won't have to worry about moving anywhere." We stood there locked in silence. Two people who hated each other with every fiber of their being, bound together by one little girl. Finally, he stepped back into the shadows. "Stay away from her," he muttered, then disappeared into the night. I closed the door and slid the bolt into place, my hands steady. Because I knew something he didn't. Emma wasn't afraid of him anymore. And that was the beginning of his end.
The very next week, I started noticing little changes. Small things at first, but to me, they were huge. Emma began walking to the school bus with her head high again, not hunched over like she was carrying a secret on her shoulders. And once, as she passed my house, she looked straight at me. Not the quick, guilty glance she used to give, but a long, steady look. Then she smiled. It was the kind of smile Derek couldn't control. 2 days later, I heard raised voices drifting from their backyard. Not shouting, not yet, but that tense tone that says a fight is brewing. Sarah. "She's just a kid, Derek. You can't talk to her like that." Derek. "She needs to learn respect. Respect doesn't come from fear." I froze by my kitchen window, straining to hear more, but the conversation dropped to a low rumble. Still, the damage was done. If Sarah was starting to push back even a little, it meant Derek's grip was slipping. Later that week, while I was tending my tomatoes, Emma wandered close to the fence again. She didn't cross over. She knew better than risk Derek's wrath. But she called out softly, "Grandma, guess what? He let me paint my room." There was pride in her voice, not because she'd painted, but because she'd won something. Her choice, her space, a little patch of life where Derek had no control. And that's when I realized she was learning how to take pieces of her freedom back, one small victory at a time. What Derek didn't understand was that control works both ways. Once the fear starts to fade, it never comes back the same way again. And Emma, my brave girl, was starting to see that he wasn't invincible.
It was a Saturday morning in early fall, the kind where the air smells faintly of wood smoke and the leaves crunch underfoot. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee when I heard laughter from across the street. Not just any laughter, Emma's. The sound was like sunshine breaking through clouds, and I set my cup down just to soak it in. Through the open front door of their house, I could see Derek and Emma in the living room. He was helping her build a small wooden birdhouse. To anyone else, it looked like the perfect Hallmark scene, the redeemed stepfather and his happy stepdaughter. But then it happened. Emma, holding the tiny hammer, said casually, "You know, I'm not scared of you anymore." The hammer froze midair in Derek's hand. The smile on his face stayed in place, but I saw his shoulders stiffen. Sarah, who'd been walking through with a laundry basket, stopped too. She looked from Emma to Derek. "What does that mean, sweetie?" she asked. Emma shrugged, as if it were nothing. "Just, Grandma told me once that monsters only win if you're scared of them, and I'm not scared anymore." I swear the air in that room changed. Sarah's eyes walked on Derek, searching for maybe the truth she'd been avoiding. Derek recovered quickly, laughing it off. "Monsters! What monsters?" he said, ruffling Emma's hair. But I saw it, that flash of panic in his eyes, because he knew Emma had just planted a seed in Sarah's mind. And once that seed took root, Derek's carefully constructed world would start to crack. From my porch, I smiled to myself. Emma wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting back. By Wednesday evening, that little moment with the birdhouse was still gnawing at Derek. I could tell. The way he moved in the yard, it was too sharp, too restless, like a man trying to keep a lid on something boiling inside him. Around 6 p.m., I was at my kitchen sink when I heard a faint thud from across the street. Then Sarah's voice, tight, urgent. "Derek, stop!" I froze, my hands still in the dishwater. Through their open side window, I could see Sarah standing between Derek and Emma. Emma's math workbook was on the table, the pages ripped in half. "She got it wrong on purpose," Derek said, his voice low but shaking with anger. "She's not even trying." Sarah stood her ground. "She's 8, Derek. It's just homework." Emma sat at the table, her little hands balled into fists in her lap. She wasn't crying, but her chin was trembling. That tremble nearly broke me. Derek exhaled through his nose, forcing himself to calm down. I could see the effort in the way his jaw worked. "Fine," he said finally, snatching his keys from the counter. "I'm going for a drive." He stormed out the front door, slamming it so hard the porch railing rattled. Sarah didn't move for a long moment. Then she knelt beside Emma and smoothed her hair back, her own voice soft now. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered. From my window, I saw Emma lean into her mother's side, and I swear, Sarah's eyes drifted toward my house, just for a second, like maybe she was wondering if the things I'd said were true.
It happened 3 days later, on a Saturday afternoon, in the most ordinary of places, the Cedar Falls hardware store. I was there for tomato steaks and potting soil, minding my own business, when I spotted Sarah and Emma by the paint aisle. They didn't see me at first. Sarah was comparing color swatches, holding them up against a small wooden jewelry box Emma was carrying. Emma's face was lit with excitement. She was clearly proud of something she'd made. Then Derek appeared from the other end of the aisle, holding a new power drill. He glanced at Emma's box, and his mouth twisted. "Is that what you've been wasting your time on?" His tone was light, but the edges were sharp. Emma's smile faltered. I made it for you," she said quietly. "It was subtle, but I caught it." Derek's grip on the drill tightened, his knuckles whitening. Sarah noticed too. She stepped in quickly. "She worked really hard on it, Derek. It's a gift." But he didn't soften. Instead, he gave a little scoff and muttered just loud enough for me to hear, and maybe for Emma too. Could have been better. That was the moment Sarah looked at him differently. Not with anger, but with something closer to realization. A flicker of memory, maybe. A connecting of dots she'd been avoiding for years. Her gaze slid to Emma, whose shoulders had drawn in just slightly, the way they used to when she was bracing for something. And then Sarah's eyes, for the first time in months, met mine across the aisle. She didn't look away. It was brief, maybe 2 seconds, but I knew. A crack had formed in the wall Derek had built around her. 2 days after the hardware store, Sarah showed up on my porch. It was early evening, the sun just starting to sink, painting the yard in a warm orange light. I hadn't seen her this close in over a year, not without Derek looming behind her. She stood there for a moment, clutching her purse strap, like she wasn't sure if she should knock or turn and run. Then, finally, 3 slow taps. When I opened the door, she didn't step inside right away. Her eyes darted around, checking the street. Derek's truck wasn't in their driveway. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded and moved aside. She came in, still tense, as though any sound might bring him storming in behind her. Sarah didn't sit. She stayed by the door, gripping her purse like a lifeline. Then she reached inside and pulled something out. A folded piece of paper, worn at the creases. It was a drawing. At first glance, it was like any child's sketch. Colorful crayon figures standing in front of a house. But then I saw the details. One figure was clearly Emma, the other a tall man with a dark scribble over his face. And in the corner, a smaller figure holding a stick. No, not a stick. A shotgun. Sarah's hand trembled as she held it out. "She made this at school last week. Her teacher sent it home. She thought I should see it." I didn't say anything. Sarah's voice cracked. "She told the teacher, 'That's Grandma. She's the one who makes sure he never hurts me anymore.'" For a moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the old wall clock ticking. When Sarah finally met my eyes, there was no more anger. No more blind defense of Derek. Just something heavy and real. She whispered, "I need to know. What did you do that night?" I took a slow breath, motioning Sarah toward the kitchen table. She hesitated, then sat down across from me, the drawing lying between us like a secret we'd both been carrying for years. "You want the truth?" I said quietly. "Then you're going to hear all of it." Sarah's hands were clenched together so tight her knuckles were white. She just nodded. I told her about the bruises, the threats, the nights I lay awake wondering if Emma would make it to morning without him snapping. I told her about the sheriff's office, the doctors, the neighbors, how every single door I knocked on was slammed shut by Derek's lies. I told her how he'd twisted you against me, Sarah, until I was nothing more than the crazy old woman in his story. And then I told her about Friday night, how I'd sat in my car by Miller's Pond with Harold's shotgun across my lap, how I'd waited for Derek's headlights to appear on that lonely road, how I'd stopped him, made him get out, and pressed cold steel against his chest. Sarah's eyes never left mine, not once. I told him, I continued, my voice steady now, that if he ever laid another finger on Emma, I'd finish what I started. And I meant every word. There was no pride in my tone, no theatrics, just the truth laid bare. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her gaze dropped to the crayon drawing again. Her fingers traced the little figure of Emma. Finally, she whispered, "He's been different ever since. I thought maybe it was counseling or him trying to change, but it was you." "It was Emma," I corrected gently. "I just gave him a reason to choose better." Sarah's lip trembled.
If I'd listened sooner, you were surviving, I said, cutting her off softly, and you both survived. That's what matters. She looked up at me, tears brimming, and for the first time in years, I saw my daughter. Not the guarded, distant woman Derek had shaped, but my Sarah. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking, "I'm sorry."
Sarah's apology hung in the air like the first crack of thunder before a long-awaited storm. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I just let it sit there, letting her own words sink in. Finally, she spoke again, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to fix everything. I can't change the years you've missed, Mom, but I can change the years ahead." She stood, walked to the living room, and called softly, "Emma, honey, come here." A moment later, Emma appeared in the doorway. 13 now, taller, with that same spark in her brown eyes I'd seen when she was little. She looked between us, sensing the shift in the air. Sarah smiled through her tears. "There's someone I want you to spend more time with, if you still want to." Emma's eyes lit up, and before I could even open my arms, she was already running toward me. When she hugged me, it wasn't like the careful, guarded embraces from before. This was full force, the kind of hug that pressed every bone in your chest together, the kind that said, "I'm home." "I missed you, Grandma," she whispered. "I missed you more than you'll ever know," I told her, kissing the top of her head. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement outside the window. Derek, standing in the yard, pretending to check something on the fence. But when his eyes met mine, I saw it. That flicker of recognition, that memory of cold steel at Miller's Pond, and the silent understanding that the truce still held. Sarah followed my gaze, then stepped closer to me and Emma, her hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder. It was subtle, but it was enough. Derek turned away first. I knew in that moment he understood something important. He wasn't just dealing with a grandmother anymore. Now he was facing a mother and grandmother standing together, and that was a battle he'd never dare start again. As the three of us sat down to share our first meal together in years, I realized something. I'd gone from being the villain in Sarah's story to the quiet hero she'd never admit to in public. And that was fine by me, because the only audience that mattered, the only person whose opinion would ever matter, was sitting right next to me, laughing as she told a story about school. And for the first time in years, the house felt like home again.
They say life doesn't give you do-overs, but I think sometimes it gives you something better. It gives you the chance to turn the page and write a different ending than the one you feared was coming. I didn't get back the birthdays I missed. I didn't get back the school plays, the Christmas mornings, or the quiet afternoons we could have shared. Those years are gone, and they'll always hurt when I think about them. But what I did get was proof that the fight was worth it. Proof that love, real, raw, sacrificial love, can survive the darkest seasons. Because Emma remembers. She remembers the safety. She remembers the love. She remembers who stood for her when nobody else would. And Sarah, she'll never say it out loud, but I can see it in her eyes now. The doubt, the questions, the little cracks in the story Derek told her. She's piecing together the truth, bit by bit. And maybe, one day, she'll be ready to hear the whole thing. As for Derek, I never had to lift that shotgun again. Because fear, the right kind of fear, is a powerful leash. And when it's tied to the protection of an innocent child, it's a leash I'll never feel guilty about holding. So if you're hearing my voice right now, I need you to remember this. When the system fails, when the world tells you to stay quiet, when people call you crazy for fighting,
you fight anyway. You fight because sometimes you're the only one standing between someone you love and the thing that could destroy them. And if you have to become the monster to keep the real monsters away, then so be it. Emma's safe. She's loved. And at the end of my life, when I look back, that will be enough. It will always be enough. Because love, real love, is thicker than blood, thicker than law, and thicker than fear. And when you love someone that much, there's nothing you wouldn't do to protect them.
If this story touched your heart, if you've ever loved someone so fiercely that you'd sacrifice everything to protect them, tell me in the comments below. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone in their fight. And if you believe in stories that reveal the truths most people are too afraid to speak, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, because more stories like this need to be heard. Remember, love is stronger than fear, and sometimes love is the bravest fight of all.